chapter 4, we want to get into the convolutional neural network. So this is getting a bit more interesting now. It's about computer vision. And probably most of you have heard of this computer vision tasks. For instance, when you want to do pattern recognition, right? You want to find out if there is any specific thing inside an image. You do segmentation, right? Classification, if you do it on images, is again a visual task, right? So computer vision usually talks about the tasks that you want to do on visual data. And this is one of the very key ideas or key problems people thought when they started to think about AI, right? And there was a bunch of studies, like there was Hubble and Wiesel study in 1950s. I put the paper for you on, the guys got Nobel Prize. I put this study for you. This is a quiet of a study. Like they got the cat, they opened the visual cortex, they put the electrode there, and they show them images. And out of that, they find out what are the neurons or what kind of pattern in the electrical signal they are seeing, right? And out of that, they started to think about what is the visual perception happening inside our cortex. And this idea somehow got developed later on by Fukushima, and he developed neocognitron, which is a kind of dual think to perceptron. And the idea was that, like, whatever Hubble and Wiesel have seen, we are now going to, I am going to give a computational model for that. And he developed this, like, how does the neural system understand one particular pattern inside a visual scene. And this somehow got a bit of attention, but again disappeared due to lack of resources for experiments. And then finally, Yann LeCun, do you know him? Do you know Yann LeCun? You're not following Twitter and other things? He's very active. He's one of the guys in the famous paper by Geoffrey Hinton developing backpropagation and other things. He is another Geoffrey Hinton in the area of deep learning. So Yann LeCun, he proposed LeNet in 1989, which he got this idea of Fukushima, and he said, like, let's do, at that point of time, people had more confidence because they could at some point train some simple neural network. And he said, why we should do MLP, maybe we should do convolution. And the idea of convolution directly came from the idea of Fukushima. And he developed that. He developed the backpropagation because at that point there was no PyTorch. And then he trained it, and he was successful in classifying letters, English letters. And you can check the paper also on the course page. That is interesting to see at that point of time how people think about it. And that network was LeNet. Again, people said, like, okay, LeNet is interesting, but computationally infeasible. We cannot do it. It just got all the time to up to 2012 when people at UofT developed the AlexNet, right? And it just won the challenge, and finally deep learning became a thing. Now, we are going to talk about CNNs, CNN, I know that you watched news, but CNN here is just the convolutional neural network. And what is this CNN? This is basically a feed-forward neural network as before. The only difference is that instead of doing basic dense computation in the linear layers, you use a convolutional layer. And what the convolutional layer is, we are going to talk about it. There's also one other operation called pooling. We are going to talk about that one as well. When you join these two things or add these two things to your feed-forward neural network, it becomes a convolutional network. And this is one serious network that you can use for many practical things. So we're going to talk about the convolutional layer, we're going to talk about the pooling layer, and I'm going to tell you what does it mean that they are doing feature extraction from visual scenes. We're going to see it. So let me start with one simple example. So here is the example. I have a neural network. I want to train it in a way that it can classify MNIST dataset, right? But the issue is that this MNIST image is somehow in a larger background. So I have the MNIST image as before, but instead of being on at the center of, like in a 28 by 28 pixel, is 3 times larger, right? And everything on the other part of the image is simply background. There's no extra image there, right? So I want to train a neural network which is able to classify this guy, right? So how can I do this? I can go ahead, by the knowledge we have up to this point, I can use an MLP, right? So I get an MLP. This MLP is going to take much larger input, right? Because everything is, like in the number of pixels, is 9 times larger, right? You roughly have 7,000 input instead of 700, right? Because your image is 3 times larger in width, 3 times larger in height, right? Very cool? Yeah. So you're going to get this guy and you train it, okay? You get MNIST image, you extend the background. Now you have the larger thing, and then you give it as a sample, you train your MLP. You can do it, but you're going to have roughly 7,000 pixels for your input, right? Cool. You're going to do that, and yeah, you can think about how many input you have, and then you can say that your number of weights are getting much larger, and because of that, the whole process is going to be more complicated. But at the end of the day, you can do it if you convert your MNIST images into the, or you resize them into the new size, and then you use the MLPs. Okay, let's say that you have done this, and okay, you trained it, and this is able to classify these guys now, right? Now I am going to give my neural network, which got trained, this image as the input. Do you think the neural network that I trained on this data is going to classify this guy properly or not? What do you think? No. Yes? Why it cannot? Exactly. So the neural network gradually going to get trained to look only on that top left corner of the image, right? Because always the digit is there, right? So this is not able to recognize this because this is happening somewhere that the neural network is trained not to look for anything, right? Everybody's cool? You see that? Now, how can I resolve that issue? Any idea? We had it in the lecture. Is there a way that I can resolve? Augmentation, great, right? So I can use augmentation, right? So I can use data augmentation. I have my handwritten one, so I don't need to put it here only. I put it also here, here, and so on, right? So if you want to think about 3, when I have one MNIST sample, I put it once here, I put it here, here, everywhere in this larger background, right? If I give all of those samples to my neural network, it's gonna understand that it should not always look at the top left corner, right? It should look anywhere on my data set, right? Sorry, on my input, right? But thinking about this one, is it simple to do that? How many of these augmentations I have for one single sample? Phew, a lot, right? It's gonna be very complicated, right? But it doesn't sound like a complicated task, right? Do you agree with me? Because if a simple neural network can classify MNIST, why should it be so hard to find it out in a larger background, right? It seems like I am adding too much complexity to resolve this issue. Now, this is the point. So the whole issue here is that we are doing too much computation for this example, and the problem does not sound like that, because to us it's again to find out where this number is, and then we look at it and we find out how what is this number, right? What is the label, correct? So if you think about the way that human being is doing it, I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, if I show you MNIST image in a very small size, right? You get used to it. And if I put it in a larger background, you don't care, right? You just look at the background and you say, oh, that's the digit and it's 3, right? This is the way that your brain works. And maybe we can mimic the way that our brain works, right? So this is the way that we want to do it. So, few things, like your brain is not processing a visual field as a whole. When you look at this scene, your brain is not like taking everything in this visual scene as the same value, right? This is why when you go somewhere, if you have, for example, a relative among a huge population, you can detect them, right? Your kid is playing on the playground, you detect them, right? Because your brain is somehow focused on the field where your kids show up, right? So it's not processing everybody. It might be a kid next to your kid, and you never recognize who is that, right? So this is one thing. And the other thing is that your brain is somehow searching within smaller fields, right? So your brain initially looks at this scene, narrows down where it should look at, and then it starts to focus on that one, right? And process only the information from that scene. So maybe we can mimic the same thing with a neural network. So how can I do it? Well, in the previous chapter, we were able to get a simple neural network and train it for classifying an MNIST image, right? So this neural network gets 784 pixels of MNIST, right? And then it's going to tell you what is the number, right? What is the digit, correct? Now I'm going to get that neural network that you trained before. I'm going to add one simple thing to it. So what I do, I add one extra label, which is null label, empty label. So I'm going to say the input is either one of the MNIST images, right? Or it's empty. It's just a free background, right? Okay? So this is not a hard thing to add to your neural network, right? Just give it a bunch of complete empty. You can even do it rule-based, right? You would say if all the pixels are this 255, then this means it's empty, right? That's the background, right? So you can add this to your neural network, and now I am going to scan my larger scene, right? So what I do, I look at this image, right? I look at a 28 by 28 part of it first, right? And I take a look at the output. If this is giving me an MNIST label, so I stop, I would say, okay, I found the digit, and that's 3, right? But if it looks at one empty field, then it's going to give me null, right? And I would say, okay, there's nothing here. I go for the next field, right? I can keep on scanning this image, and every time I just look at a 28 by 28, because my neural network is trained on a 28 by 28 pixel, right? Everybody's cool? You see what I'm doing? Does it make sense? So if you have this neural network, which is looking on this tiny image, 28 by 28, you don't care what the whole scene is, right? You can always find out what is the digit there as long as you scan it, right? Questions? So this is the whole idea. You're going to break it into windows of 28 by 28. Each time you use your neural network to scan one of them, if you classify one MNIST image, you return true. If no, you return false. And then finally, you're going to XOR everything. This means that you're going to find out where the guy was and what was that digit, right? And if you do that, you're basically doing convolution. That is the idea of convolution. You get a window, a filter, you roll it over one scene, right? And then you try to find out what is inside that particular window every time, right? Using the same window. Okay? And these are going to compute you a bunch of features. Questions? Okay. If you got the idea, now let me start with this very simple CNN. This is the one that I have designed. Okay. Yeah. Just a few notes before we get into this example. Like CNN is extracting feature by looking at those windows. This is what I told you. And this scanning procedure is what we call it convolution. And you can think about CNN to be a giant neural network, but that giant neural network is actually not fully connected. And don't worry, don't get confused. I'm going to explain it once we are over with the whole architecture, because at that point you clearly see it, okay? But you can see that what we are doing with CNN is essentially, again, like MLP, but this time this MLP is not fully connected in every layer. Like it's sparsely connected, and it has shared parameters, like weights of two connections are the same. When you change one, the other one changes. But we're going to see that, no worries. So let me just give you this example. So this example is consistent with your assignment 1. You remember in assignment 1, you trained this guy which was detecting X, right? It was classifying X on a 3x3 patch. Do you remember that? Now, that one was simple to do by a single perceptron, right? Because that was linearly separable. It was a simple problem, right? Now, this guy, this perceptron had 9 different weights. The weights get multiplied with these guys. It had a bias as well. So 10 parameters in total. Now, the thing that is going to happen if you give this guy, this X pattern, into this perceptron, is going to give you label 1, right? What does that mean? That means that at this point, after activation, it's 1. Before activation, the value is negative or positive? Positive, right? Right? Okay. So before activation is positive, after activation is 1. If I give this guy, what's going to happen before activation? Negative, and I'm going to get label 0, right? You remember that. Okay. Now, what I want to do, I want to get this guy, this perceptron, and use it to find out the pattern X inside a larger image, exactly like the example I showed you here, right? So what I'm going to do, let's say I have a 10 by 10 image. I do know there is one or maybe multiple 3 by 3 patterns X, like a 3 by 3 patch pattern X, is inside this 10 by 10 image. I want to recognize it. I want to find out whether there is such a thing or not, right? So how can I do that? Well, I can again do the same idea, right? I'm going to put the perceptron here, right? And this perceptron has 9 different weights, right? I put these 9 different weights exactly on the location of the pixels, right? So W1 to W9 just sorted in the right form, right? Now I'm going to get my patch. I put it on the first top left corner part, right? Now, if I give this guy to this perceptron and add the bias, what's going to be the classification output? Look at that first patch. What is it? Is it X? It's not, right? So it's going to give you 0, right? So you're going to get 0. Now I want to go for the next patch. What should I do? I should just go with step 1, right? Because I don't want to lose any part of my image, right? So I'm going to take 1 step right. Everybody's cool? You see what I'm doing? So I was here. I checked this patch. It was not X. It classified it 0, right? Cool? Next thing. I go for the next one, right? Is it X or not? 0, right? What about the next one? It's again 0. If I keep on going all the way towards the last patch on the row, all of them going to be 0, right? Now, next thing, where should I go? Down, 1 step down, start all the way left, right? You see that? So I'm going to jump here. Again, I check that is not pattern X, so I'm going to get 0. Next one, pattern X, right? So you're going to give me 1, and I keep on going like this, right? Each time I just go 1 step down, go right. Everybody's cool? And now every time I classify, I'm going to record the numbers here in this map, right? You see it? So this is a map, a matrix of numbers, right? A 2-dimensional array. And I can write down my classification outputs there. Okay. If I do that, at the end of the day, I'm going to get a single 1 here, and everything else is 0, right? So what does that tell me, that new map? It tells me there is exactly 1 pattern X inside the image, right? It even tells me where that pattern is, right? Because I can somehow track where this happened on the original image. Everybody's cool? Okay, so now that I have this guy, I have only 1 pattern X, I can get everybody and OR them, right? It just compute the logical OR on all of these guys, and then this is going to tell me whether pattern X exists or not, right? Now one question, how many neurons do I need in order to realize a logical function OR? How many neurons I need? We did it? One, right? You can always realize OR with one neuron, right? You remember we did it in chapter 1, right? So you can do it with one extra neuron, right? You just put one output neuron. That output neuron is going to tell you whether there is X or not, right? Everybody's cool? You see what I'm doing? Great. So one point that you might pay attention here is that, well, you didn't need to classify every time you're scrolling over patches, right? Let's do it without activation. So I have the same perceptron, but I'm throwing away the activation, the step function. What's going to happen when I look at the first patch? It's going to give me some feature which is positive, right? Sorry, negative, because this is classified as 0, right? Next one is again negative, next one negative, and so on towards the end, right? Again, I come to the next row, it's negative, next one is positive because it's pattern X, and I keep going like this, right? Now, if I build my output map, it's going to look like this, right? All the guys are negative, one of them is positive, right? Maybe I can do it first, and once it's over, I can take the guy which is maximum, and then I can do the activation, right? If I do that, I actually do not need that on the neuron as well, right? Everybody's cool? You see what I'm doing? You actually can do it with one single activation, right? If you take the maximum guy, right? You pull out what is the maximum guy, and out of that you find out what is the label here, whether X exists or not. Okay, so it's the same thing. You really don't need to activate when you are scrolling over your patch. Now, what we are doing here, we are actually computing a bunch of features about our image, right? We look at this image with the same filter. There is one fixed filter, that is the filter, and this filter is looking at this image, and for every patch is extracting one information. That information in this example is one number, and that number is either negative or positive. The negativeness is telling us that it's not pattern X. The positiveness is telling us this is pattern X, right? So it's a bunch of numbers. Those numbers are talking about your input image, right? So you are extracting a bunch of features or a map of features out of, you're extracting a map of features out of your image using this filter, right? And the filter is exactly the weights of your neuron, right? Your perceptron, right? Running over your image. Everybody's cool? Now, one thing that you should pay attention here is that when you are scrolling this weight all over your image, the weights are not changing, right? So this means that the weights that are looking into this patch are exactly the same guys looking at this patch, and so on, right? So when you are on every single patch, the weights are the same, right? So the filter that you use in order to screen your image is not changing, right? This is one fixed filter, right? Now, how many weights does it have? 9. If you wanted to look at the whole image at once, like what you do in MLP, how many weights do you need? Or here is 10 by 10, right? You need 100, right? 10 times more. You see it, right? So this guy is just doing it with significantly lower number of parameters, right? But still, given that you are always taking a look at the same question, is it pattern X or not, you don't really need to change from one patch to another, right? The task is to check whether this is X or not, right? And you can always do it with the same filter, right? Questions? Great. So if you got no question, the thing that I showed you here, you are moving with the stride one, right? Each time you just move one step right, right? Or if you want to come down, you just come one step down, right? You can do it also with larger stride. So this is with the stride 2. If I want to do it with the stride 2, what should I do? I should jump with 2 steps, right? So I started at the very first patch. I ignore the next patch. I go for the second next patch, right? You see it? So obviously, I can go all the way. Here, at this point, can I go 1 step further or 2 steps further? No, because my filter gets out of the image, right? So I'm going to stop it, and then I'm going to jump down. Where should I go when I'm jumping down? 2, right? So if I jump down, I do not start here, but I start here. You see it? Right? And now if I do that, this could be the chance that I miss that pattern X, right? You see it, right? So this is the price that I'm paying. For what? If I compute my feature map, that feature map is now roughly 2 times smaller, right? So I just doubled my step size, so I just ignored some patches in between, and then I computed less features. So it's less computation, but the price I'm paying, I might miss a few guys, right? A few patches. Now in this example, it might be very crucial, but as we see gradually over the chapter, you see that when you are processing with a deep convolutional neural network, it doesn't really matter, right? At the end of the day, you don't really do a stride 2 or something. You always do a stride 1, and whenever you want to get rid of a bunch of features, you do pulling with larger stride. And this is going to avoid the chance or reduce significantly the chances of missing important features. Questions? No question? Everybody's cool? Great. So this is what we call it a stride. And if I want to just show it compactly, I'm going to say conv, this is convolution. Image, this is the input that you have here. With this filter, this is the filter you use to go over your image. And I can put this stride. But you shortly see that I don't need this stride. I can drop it. Okay, cool. Now, I can give a mathematical formula for that. How can I do that? I could say, okay, let's say I have this filter W. This is in general F by F. So F, in our example, it was 3, right? It could be 3 by 3, right? 5 by 5, and so on, right? Typically, you try to set F to be an odd number. What is the reason? You're going to see it. Because when you do odd feature plus 0 padding, then you do not lose anything, right? You're going to perfectly match, right? This is usually the reason. Okay. We call it filter. Some people call it kernel, and then you get this filter or kernel, and then you go over your image. So X, the map X, is that 2-dimensional array containing all of your image, right? And then filter is the smaller guy, and then you can do it in general with the stride S, right? Now you can go ahead and do the like specify what is the formula. At the end of the day, the formula, the feature that you are computing, that Z is the guy which I showed it at this side before, right? That feature map. That feature map, every single entry of this feature map, if you think about the feature map here, you look at one particular feature you are computing. This is your filter going somewhere on your image, right? Getting every weight inside the filter, getting multiplied to the pixel on your image, and you add them up, right? Everybody's cool? Yeah? So this is what's going to happen. Filter W getting multiplied entry-wise with that patch of your image, Xij. This is the part on your image where you put the filter, you multiply them, you add them up, right? And it's going to give you one single number, right? Everybody's cool? You see that? And now you can go ahead and say, what is this I and j, right? You would say, okay, if I am thinking about the patch which is on the ith patch in terms of row and jth patch in the column, then in the column it's going to just, start from somewhere like S is the step. You start from 1, then you start from 1 plus S and so on. And you're going to end up at the filter size, right? So you're going to get F different pixels forward, and then you stop, right? You can try it at home. It's going to be the same formula. You can trust me because I have done it a couple of times. but it's not really important at the end of the day if you want to implement or you want to think about convolution, just to have the formula. And you can do the same thing here, right? You are going to just jump with the steps S, so as you start from 1, then you go 1 plus S and so on down, right? And every time the row is going to contain F different entries, right? This is one F by F patch on your image. Your filter gets multiplied to this, you add them up, this is the feature you compute, right? This is the convolution. Okay, cool. Now, pulling. I did the convolution, I computed this feature map, right? Right? So this was the feature map we computed for the 10 by 10 image, and it had just one single plus, right? Now, if instead of processing this feature map, I process something else. I look at this guy, right, and take the maximum out of it, right? And then I process it. Does it change the result? No, right? Because the maximum guy is the guy which is positive, right? And that one is the only thing that I want to find out whether there is X or not. If there is no X pattern at all, then all of those features are negative, right? And then the maximum guy is going to be negative as well. When I activate it, it's going to be again 0, right? If there is one or more than one pluses here, then the maximum guy is definitely a plus number. So activated version is 1, right? So it's not going to change. Meaning that I really do not need to look at all the features I computed, right? I need to look at a subset of them, right? That subset could be as small as just a single of them, right? So this is the idea of pooling. So when you compute a feature map, right? The thing that you can do, you can maybe take a subpart of it, right? And of course, we don't do it typically with one giant with one giant max pooling. We typically do it again patch-wise. Like we look at the first tiny patch, we take the maximum, second tiny patch, we take the maximum, and so on. So we're going to talk about this. So for example, in this example, if you think about this one, you usually do it with the same filter or same patches as your filter size, right? So you would say, okay, I'm going to look at the first patch, right? Right? I'm going to look at the first patch, then I'm going to look at the second patch, and so on. This patch, when I'm taking the maximum guy, this is going to be positive, right? Because the positive guy is inside the patch. This one, the maximum guy is positive, but here it's going to be negative. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely negative, right? And I keep on going like this. When I come here, again, I have a positive here, and so on till I get to the end, right? Right? Now, that one, which I computed here, is still telling me the information. There is one positive in the original feature map, right? And you can use it, right? This is one property that it has. The second property that we're going to see more later on is that this is somehow reducing the jitter inside the feature map. Because if you look at this guy has one single positive, right? Now think about those positive and negative numbers as like, think about the location of the pixels as some grid points on your two-dimensional space, and that feature value on the third dimension, okay? The plus guy going to be a pick, right? Everybody else is down in negative, right? But if you look at this one is less spiky, right? It's going to have 4 plus ones, right? And lots of negative ones, right? And those negative ones obviously are larger than the negative ones here because for every patch I took the maximum one, right? So I am somehow smoothing what I am computing in my feature computation with convolution, and you're going to see it. We're going to get numerical examples also in the assignment, and you see it. But this is another key factor about pooling. So it's going to smoothen the features that you have computed so you do not decide based on very spiky features. Everybody's cool? Questions? Okay. Now, once I have this guy done, the last thing that I need to do is that I get these features and I can put them in form of a vector, for example, and pass it through one neuron, right? that neuron is telling me if there is a plus here or not, right? And I can do it by a single neuron as we talked about, right? And this is the last feed-forward neural network that you always have inside a convolutional layer. Now, you can do the convolution and pulling as much as you want. So there is no need that you stop your processing here. Maybe you get this new feature map and you do another convolution with a new filter on that, right? You compute a bunch of new features, you activate, you pull, you go ahead, right? You keep on going, right? And then you do the final fully connected layer. So you can do it this way, and if you do it that way, you're basically designing one convolutional neural network, right? So this is how a convolutional neural network looks in general. So this is the first part, which is the convolution we talked about, okay? So you have one filter, it's going over the patches on your image, it's computing a bunch of features. This is the feature map that you compute. You typically activate it, we're going to talk about this, and after doing that, you could do pulling, right? You might do multiple convolutions, then you do pulling. You can do one convolution, pulling, convolution, pulling. This is totally your choice, but once you have done enough number of these convolutions and pulling and you are happy with the final result, then you are going to flatten them. This means that you look at this last map that you have, that last map after the pulling, and then you say, okay, all of the features here, I put them in a vector, right? And these are input of a new feed-forward neural, fully connected neural network, an MLP, right? So I'm going to flatten these guys, and then I pass it through a fully connected neural network, right? And I do my task, whatever that is, classification, regression, whatever, right? Everybody's cool? So one thing that you might pay attention here is that when you are doing convolution, you're using filters, right? And filter is going to take you significantly less amount of weights as compared to a fully connected neural network, right? So you can use those filters to extract fine features out of your image. You process enough, you do pulling enough to get rid of redundant features, right? And you're going to get left with a bunch of good features at the very end, which are significantly less as compared to your image dimension, right? Then you use an MLP. And that MLP, this MLP is actually practical to design because there are few samples, right? Whereas the original input, maybe it's, I don't know, 1024 by 1024 RGB image, 1024 by 1024 13-channel satellite image, then that is going to be crazy, right? A huge input, you need significant number of weights, and it's hard to train them. But this is not only about being hard to train them. It's not efficient training, and at the same time, you do have the feeling the problem is not that complicated that I need all of those, that huge complicated model, right? Everybody's clear? Questions? No question? Okay, great. So, yeah, so this is the general architecture as I said. In general, we are going to go deeper. We are going to process this more and more before we give it to the last feed-forward neural network. Okay, so this thing that you see here is essentially VGG16. This, at some time, it was a kind of, you know, a bad boy at some time, right? But nowadays, not anymore, right? And sometimes it was like a real gangster could process any image. 2014, I guess it was proposed. And we're going to talk about this guy later on. I'm going to give you the idea, like how you can read these numbers here, okay? You're going to get, but what it's doing basically is start from the image, do convolution, right? It does again convolution. And those red guys that you see are pulling. So here you do convolution, you pull, so you're going to get the smaller features. Again, you do convolution, pull, and so on, till you get here, right? And at the end, you have significantly a smaller number of features, right? If you multiply these guys, and you're going to see why we write it down in this form, because it's multiple channels, right? Here you have 7 by 7 small map, 512 of them, right? And this guy, when you just flatten it, it's going to be 4,000 roughly, right? And you start with 4,000 and you do your classification, but if you compute this number, that is significantly larger than 4,000, right? So you do not process it directly here. And the number of weights you have here is not comparable with, having your deep MLP. So we're going to talk about this. We're going to break it down, and you see every details later on. Questions? Okay. Now, this image that you see is from the Hubble and I guess I took it from the Hubble and Wiesel, or maybe Fukushima, one of them. But this is basically what they figured out inside their study, which I told you is a quite harsh study. Maybe at that time that was a norm, but nowadays, yeah, we cannot think about that. But in that study, you say this is the visual inputs, right? Right? So this is the scene that you are seeing. And the model they develop is somehow that your brain works like this. This is having some S cell. They call it simple cell. And this simple cell, what it's doing, it's pretty much having same sort of firing inside the neurons. Same thing, right? Somehow operating on all patches inside the visual scene, right? Now, some of these patches are somehow firing your neuron, right? So this is where your simple cell is getting activated, right? And somehow your cortex understands, oh, go ahead and check that patch, right? And then this is going to get into a C cell, and C cell is the complex cell. This is what tries to understand what is inside that patch. And they claim that actually your brain is doing somehow multiple layers of that. And this is basically what we do in convolutional neural networks, right? So this is how you watch the scene, right? You're looking for someone, you look at the scene completely, and suddenly you see, oh, that's the guy, right? So initially your C cells or S cells are just monitoring or sensing the whole region, and then you can focus on some part with your C cell, right? And if you have seen some people like me, I am like that. Like you go somewhere and somebody's just doing this for me, and I never see them, right? So probably my S cells are destroyed, right? So you cannot. So you have seen some people cannot quickly get that. Maybe their C cells are not enough, or they are somehow getting less tolerant to the activation, right? It might be. Like they have seen so many scenes that the neurons got used to higher activation. So maybe the guy needs to shoot a firework to see them, right? Okay. Okay, so that was, as I said, the original idea that made people to develop convolutional neural networks. But for us, from a computational point of view, it also makes sense, right? Great. So that's great. So let me start with the convolutional neural network. So I want to first get over the convolutional layer. Then I get through the pooling layer. And the output layer is nothing because we already have done this before. And the key point is to just understand what is convolutional and pooling layer. Now, once you understand it, there is no much thing and no much more things to discuss. But I am going to show you one very interesting property, and that is that when you do your forward computation by a convolution, right? The process is convolution. It's quite simple. And then you can see that when you are back propagating, you are again doing a convolution. And this makes these kind of networks significantly efficient for training. Okay? So let's get there. Let me start with two-dimensional convolution. Now, one thing you should pay attention when you use, for example, torch, 2D there means a bit different. And once we are finished with this part, you get what 2D means there, right? But right now, this 2D for me, it means that the input that you have is a two-dimensional map, right? It's just a single channel, right? A matrix of numbers, right? So that is exactly what we did in our example, right? So you have a weight, you have your input, you have a stride, right? And then you can go ahead and write down the equation. I told you the equation before, right? You don't really need to care about what the equation is, okay? Because you don't really use it at any point. And if you want to really do convolution by hand, you can always do it visually, right? That's one thing. But one thing I want you to pay attention here is the number of feature outputs in terms of the feature, the input size. If I have one input, which is say 100 by 100, right? Even if I do convolution with the stride 1, the output is not 100 by 100, right? You see it, right? So we had 10 by 10 inputs, right? We did the convolution with a filter 3 by 3, right? And then we ended up with the output, which was, anyone paid attention? Can you compute it in your mind right now? It should be 8 by 8, right? Because it's not 9 by 9, because you're 3 by 3, right? You keep going till you hit the edge, right? And that, when you hit the edge, 2 guys are left, right? 2 count. 3 minus 1, right? So it's the thing that you have always, but it's not important. I just wanted to give you this attention that, yeah, the filter is going to somehow reduce a tiny bit in the features, right? But that is not important. We actually get over it using zero padding. But one other thing is the stride, right? The stride shows up in denominator, right? And it makes sense, right? If you do it with a stride 2, roughly speaking, not exactly, roughly speaking, you are getting 2 by 2 smaller feature map at the output, right? So if in that case you got 8 by 8, you get roughly 4 by 4. It was not 4 by 4 for us, it was 3 by 3, right? Because of that zero padding thing that I told you, right? We're going to explain this, but at the end of the day, this stride is going to somehow scale the output. The stride is the guy who is going to scale, right? If you want the feature map to shrink by factor 2, you need a stride 2, right? Factor 3, you need a stride 3, and so on. Okay, so X is the image, F by F is the filter W, and then you can write the convolution in this form. Now, let's do one visual thing. So this is my input, and on purpose, I put the input not to be like square, which is usually the case, right? Usually you have, say, for example, 5 by 5. 28 by 28 input, right? But it could be in general anything. So here we have 4 by 5 input, and then this is my input. What I'm going to do, I'm going to look at this patch first, yeah? 2 by 2 patch. Then I multiply it entryway with this filter, right? I add things up, I write it down here, right? Next thing, right? Same operation, right? Next thing, and so on, right? I keep on going like this. And one thing that you can see is that the number of features you have are a bit different as compared by the input, right? And the key point here is that, for example, in this last row, I go one step forward, one step forward, one step forward, one step forward. Now, if I want to be complete, I need to take one step further, right? But I cannot yet, right? We are going to add zeros at the end of the day, and then we can go out, okay? So you can put it inside the equation, it's going to give you the same thing. Now, next thing, a numerical example. Because everybody is very tired, we can do one example, so we refresh. Okay, this guy, it wants to get this filter, and it wants to convolve it with this image, right? So you're going to get this filter, multiply it here. It means that it's going to just sum up all of these L locations, right? And I'm going to write it down here. Now, if I go for the next patch, and I'm doing it with the stride 1, what would be the output feature for the next patch? 0.9 plus 0.2 is 1.1 plus 0 is 1.1, right? Moment of truth, yes. Okay, 1.1, right? Okay, each time you go, you exactly get this guy, you multiply it on this one, right? And then you add them up. So you're going to be this L side added up here. Everybody sees that? Yeah, it makes sense for you, right? So if I go on, exactly, I am computing these numbers, right? And you might tell me why I'm showing all of these numbers. I have a reason for that. You're going to see it quickly. Okay? Okay. Now, if I want to do it with larger stride, for example, stride 2, how can I do it? I start with this guy, this patch. What would be the next patch that I go after? Where's the next patch? x13, exactly. I start at x13, right? So this is the first batch, multiply with the filter, I write it down here. Then I go for the next batch, so I'm going to jump, right? I just ignore one of the columns, right? Now, what is the next batch? I need to go down, right? I cannot go any further right? So I'm going to jump here. Now, this guy is 2 by 2, right? Is smaller as compared to that one. And it's roughly smaller by factor 2, right? Not exactly, but roughly, right? Okay, cool. So you can check the formula, it's going to be the same. Now, if you want to do numerical thing, it's going to be the same thing as before, right? For this one is 2.1. Then I am going to jump from here to this one, right? So I'm going to directly jump here, right? And it's going to be again 2.1. What would be the next feature if I calculate it? Can you do it quickly? What should it be? 1.7, right? Because you're going to jump on this patch, and this is 1.7, right? And if you jump here, it's going to 2.5, right? Now, if you think about this new feature map that I have computed, this is the second feature map with the stride 2. This is the feature map I computed with the stride 1. Do you see any connection between these two? It's a subset and it's not only subset, that's right. How can I get from this one to this one? Just remove these lines, right? You see it? Look at this guy. If I ignore the center guy, if I ignore those columns, right, I'm going to end up with that guy exactly, right? Do you know what we call this process from this one getting to this one? What do we call it? It's not max pooling here yet because you do not say necessarily this is the maximum. I mean, like for example, here in this patch, this is not maximum, right? It's not pooling. No, you're doing something simpler. You're downsampling, right? You're downsampling your image, this feature map. This feature map, you downsample it. It means that first column you keep it, second column you ignore. Third column you keep it, next column you ignore. And you keep on going like this, right? For the rows the same, right? First row you keep, next row you ignore, right? This is downsampling, right? So this is basically downsampling that you do. So if you do downsampling by factor f, and f could be 2, 3, and so on. If I do it by factor 2, for example, this means that I'm ignoring every second row or column, right? If I do it by factor 3, then this means like this, right? I keep the first guy, I ignore second and third, right? I go for the fourth one. I keep the fourth one, I ignore fifth and sixth, right? And so on. And you can go on with higher factors, right? What you see here is that your convolution with the stride 2, right? With the stride 2, yes, is going to be the downsampled version of your convolution with the stride 1, right? And what is the sampling factor here? What is the downsampling factor? It's 2, right? Same as the stride, right? So the thing that you see here is that when you are doing stride S, it's like you do it with the stride 1, and then you do downsampling. You see it? Everybody's cool? Now, this is typically the way that convolution within a stride is implemented on your computer, right? So your computer is not really jumping, even though it's going to be computationally more efficient. But nowadays we have GPUs, right? And GPUs are perfect in doing this stuff, so it doesn't worth it really trying that, right? So you usually compute the whole stride 1, and then you do downsampling, right? And this is what we are going to do for the rest of this course. We never think about the stride, really. Whenever we need a stride, we are going to downsample. Okay? Everybody's cool? Now, one thing that you can do, so convolution, as I said, with stride S is going to be the downsampled version of convolution with the stride 1. This is why I am going to always show the convolution. I don't indicate the stride anymore because there is no point in that, right? It's just a simple downsampling, right? So yeah, that's it. But this guy is going, I mean, it has two properties, thinking about the convolution with the stride in this way. So if you think about convolution with the stride as convolution with the stride 1 and downsampling. This helps you first when you are going to backpropagate. It's going to make life much, much, much easier. Okay? You're going to see that. This is the first thing. The second thing is that it's going to let you define a stride smaller than 1, which might have been a bit weird at the first place. How can I define it? I can do the resampling in the other way. So I did downsampling. It means that I have larger image. I downsample it to a smaller one, right? But if I have a smaller one, I can just upsample it to a larger one, right? Can I do that? I just add zeros, right? I do not drop things. I mean, I keep things, but I add as much zeros as I need. So if I have this guy and I want to upsample it with factor 3, what's going to happen? So I get 0 in between all the pixels, right? Right? So we're going to get upsample in this form. Everybody's cool? Everybody's seeing that? So this is upsampling. So when you talk about upsampling, so I keep the first column, right? I want to do it by factor f. I keep adding f minus 1 colon 0, right? Then the second column, f minus 1 zeros, and so on, right? Once I'm finished, then I can add zeros in the rows as well, right? And you might tell me, should I add zeros in the last column, last row? It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you see you are going to do zero padding to match everything, right? That's not important. Don't think about that. Okay? Everybody's cool? Yes? It's no loss of information. Blue guy, pink guy, everybody's there, right? They just have zeros in between. Oh, when we downsample, yes, we are losing information. We only do it when we are sure those information are redundant. So you do it usually in higher layers. And the reason is that the outliers, you know, I have computed so much features that many of these features are basically the same. So I'm going to ignore a bunch of them, right? Questions? Okay, so this is upsampling, and by upsampling, you are increasing the size of your feature map. Now, what you can do if you want to do convolution with a stride smaller than 1, you can get your image, you first upsample it, you have a larger image, right? And then you do the convolution, right? The output convolution is going to be even larger than your image, right? Everybody's cool? Everybody's seeing that? So what is happening here, for example, if I am doing it by a filter 2 by 2, look at this image, right? If I do it by filter 2 by 2, I am going to look at first this patch, right? This is small patch, top left, right? And I am going to take into account all 4 pixels to compute my features, right? But if I do it on the upsample one, I'm going to look at this top left guy, which contains only the blue feature, right? Blue pixel. So it means that my first feature is computed from 1 pixel after upsampling, whereas before upsampling, I'm computing it out of 4 pixels, right? So your features are more concentrated, right? This is the meaning of upsampling, or a stride is smaller than 1, right? Okay, so that's it. Now, this is how we can define the fractionally strided convolution. So I can have like a stride 1 over s. So it's a stride half, for example, or 1/3. And when I say a stride 1 over s, it means that I get my image, I first upsample it by factor s, then I do convolution, right? Everybody's cool? Clear? Now, this is the way that you do it. So you upsample with factor 1 over s here, right? For example, if s is half, 1 over s is factor 2, right? You upsample by factor 2, and then you do the convolution, right? This is a stride 1 over 2. And now you can, in general, define a stride s1 by s2, right? So any fractional stride, like 2/3. When I say a stride 2/3, it means that I first get my image, I do upsampling by factor, what is it? 3, right? 3, the denominator, right? I get that larger image. I do my convolution. After that, I do a downsampling by factor, if I'm doing 2/3. 2, right? Great. So you see that. So you can't, if you have S2 by S1, then you first do upsampling by factor S1, then you do the convolution, then you do downsampling by factor S2. And this is the key factor here. So stride at the end of the day is just a resampling, right? It could be upsampling or downsampling. The only thing that you should pay attention, and I don't think it's a way that you can mistake it, but just keep in mind, upsampling is happening before convolution, right? It does not mean to add 0 after convolution, right? You need to first add 0 to somehow make some room for your pixels, then you do convolution, upsampling before convolution, and downsampling obviously after convolution, right? Because you want to get rid of features, right? Everybody's cool? Questions? No question? Okay, so this is going to help us a lot when we want to do stride, when we want to backpropagate over the convolution, because we don't really need to care about this stride, okay? Just one last thing, and I'm going to let you go for the reading week. Padding. If you want, as I told you, when you are doing the convolution, right? When you look at the patches, you can keep going to left, to right, or down, and then you somehow, at some point, you stop, right? Because you get out of your image. But this means that the edge pixels, you are somehow ignoring them, right? In order to get rid of that one, you can somehow add zeros around your image, right? And it's going to let you just go in that go outside your image, right? This is what you can do with what you can do. Okay. Yes. Now you might tell me why I am interested to get exactly the feature map, which is looking exactly like my image. You can see it. I mean, probably some of you do the project Explainable AI, and there you see some example of that. But sometimes we are really interested to see, for example, after doing convolution on the image, what's going to happen to that image, right? For example, I get the Amnes image, and I do the convolution, then I get something at the output. How does that guy look like, right? If I want to do that, I want to have the guy at the same size as the input, right? And I always lose a few rows and columns, right? If I do zero padding, I can add it, right? This is one simple reason, but the more important reason is that you don't want to lose the edge pixels, right? Because if you do that, your filter, if you don't do zero padding, your filter does not capture enough information about the edge pixel. Now, how you can do zero padding? Well, I can add some zeros at the right, down, left, up. It's totally your choice, right? So you do add zeros, and after that, you start to do the convolution, right? But one thing, if I am using a filter 3 by 3, does it make sense that I add this much of 0 here? No, right? If I'm doing filter 3 by 3, right? Adding 3 0 columns on the left, it means that the first feature is always 0 plus 3, right? 0, right? Doesn't make sense, right? So one thing that you want to pay attention is that you don't want to add more than the size of your filter zeros, because it's just redundant. It doesn't harm, but it just gives you 0 features at the output. Obviously 3 is not good, but that one is okay. All right? So in practice, you typically add symmetric zeros all around, right? This is why I told you odd number is better. Because how many columns and rows you are missing? If you have 3, filter 3, how many you miss? 2, right? If you have 5, 4. If you have f minus 1, right? If you want to add symmetric all around, you want this f minus 1 divided by 2 be an integer, right? This is the reason you use always odd number, right? If you use 3, then 3 minus 1 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, right? So it means that you need 1 column, 1 row around it, right? So you can do the very symmetric 0 padding around, right? This is the main reason that you do always even numbers. But you can think about a general case, and in the general case, I mean, you can fix the size as you wish, right? So typically it's symmetric, everybody is the same, and this is the main reason that you use the f to be odd number. right? Okay, let me see, yes. Okay, this is with zero padding. This is not really important. You can check it. Now, one last thing is that we're going to practice it quite a lot. But when it comes to convolution, like the chart of a convolutional neural network, sometimes you see people that they give you the filter size, they give you the input size, they give you the feature output size, right? But they don't tell you whether they are using zero padding or not and how many they have added. The key point is that they don't need to do that, right? If I tell you that the input is 28 times 28, and the output is also 28 times 28, and I use the filter 3 by 3, you immediately understand that I have done zero padding, right? And probably I have done a symmetric with 1 all around the image, right? So I don't need to tell you zero padding anymore, right? So you might not see it immediately on the map, on the writing, or in the description of the architecture, but you can always infer it from the text. Okay? Everybody's cool? Questions? Okay, that's what we did. I mean, we are pretty much over. The only thing left is that what's going to happen when I have multiple channels, like RGB images, right? It would have been great if I could talk for 1 extra hour, but I cannot do it. So we're going to do it after reading week. A convolutional neural network, I don't give you a serious question in the exam, right? If you get the idea of convolution, that's enough, okay? Questions? Cool. So see you after the reading week.